Would you state your name and spell it for the court reporter, please, sir?
Yeah, it's Tom Carroll, Tomcarroll.
And Mr. Carroll, where do you live?
I live in Shasta, California.
And what is your job?
I'm the Director of Transportation for the Shasta Union High School District.
All right. Can you tell us, in your job, what are your duties?
Everything. I oversee the transportation and maintenance for approximately 1,500 students in the 1,800 square miles of Shasta County.
Okay. How many school buses do you oversee?
I oversee the maintenance of approximately 50 school buses. I have 24 in my district's fleet and another 12 for another district that we contract for in the city of Reading.
Okay. Are those school buses all compliant with CARB?
No.
Okay. You have had to retrofit some of them, is that right?
Yes, sir. 10 in my fleet and 12 in the Reading fleet.
Okay. Would you tell the members of the board, please, what, if any, troubles you've had with those buses that have been retrofit?
Well, I would have to say that they certainly work to lower emissions because they're parked most of the time. So I think that they've exceeded their goal. We consistently have problems on a daily basis, if not multiple times per day, with these retrofit filters, and even with the new ones that come on the new buses. But to stick specifically to the retrofitted filters, constant plugging issues where they're not generating enough heat on the passive side to burn the emissions off while traveling down the road, where they're having to be plugged in on the active side. We run a hybrid type system. So we run 4 regeneration panels for those. They're plugged into something all the time. It's constantly an issue. If it's not burning them off, it's some other trouble on the system that's causing it to malfunction, a heating element that doesn't work, all kinds of things.
Sometimes are those breakdowns of the buses during their regular route of picking up and delivering the school children? Unfortunately,
yeah. Generally what it causes us, you do usually get some kind of an indicator that you're going to have a problem. So what it's done for us mostly is had us reevaluate the allocation of our fleet. So we have to be much more cognizant of which buses are out on the road, which buses are on field trips, constantly modifying what we would normally do in our standard operating procedure. So lots of times a bus will come up with a small minor problem the day before or the day of a field trip, and we'll have to rotate another bus into service to do that and pull them out of service. We don't want the buses breaking down on the road with the kids in them. Occasionally it happens, we do miss a beat, but generally what it causes for us is more buses parked in the parking lot waiting to get in the shop for repairs.
One of the difficulties that you mentioned to me when we talked was a concern for safety when the bus breaks down when students are on it. Would you tell the board about that?
Safety is always an issue. It's a very intricate, difficult process to unload a busload of students on the side of the road and move them to another bus. We always try to do that with 3 people plus the driver there. We like to put one in front, one in back, one in the middle, and then the driver, and try to herd the kids to the other bus. But you know, anytime you're on the side of the road doing that maneuver, that's something that can always go astray. Kids are kids, they're unpredictable. You can't put a leash on everyone and move them from one place to the other. So it is problematic. It takes a lot of staff time, a lot of resources, and we devote a lot of time and energy to doing what we can to ensure that that maneuver is as safe as possible, but it is difficult.
What are the ages of the buses that you've retrofit?
We've retrofitted all the way back to 1997 models.
And is there going to come a time when those buses will not be usable even though they're in compliance?
I mean less usable than now?
Yes.
Yes, there will be. We still operate 4 buses in my fleet that are not compliant with ARB regulations. They cannot become compliant. They don't currently certify or make a retrofit device that would go on those that would work. So because of that, December 31st, 2017, those buses will no longer to be operated on the road. Not sure exactly how they're going to enforce that. I've asked that question several times. No one's given me an answer on that. But yeah, the longer that they're out there, the more problematic they become and the more expensive they are to operate. And eventually, what will happen is just through attrition, we'll have such a high operating cost on the vehicle that we'll have to make a decision. Do we replace it or we park it? If we park it, 60 kids walk to school and a person loses their job.
If you had to buy a new bus, what would a new bus cost?
The last new buses that I purchased were, I think they're 2012 models, and they were running $198,000 a piece. So for round numbers, they're around $200,000 a piece now.
Do you maintain these filters yourself? Do you do the burning, the cleaning yourself?
We do a vast majority of it. We don't de-ash the filters in my department, but we do have a pulse cleaner. We do regenerate them. We do as much maintenance as we possibly can with the equipment that we have, but when it comes to de-ashing, which was originally advertised as an annual maintenance event, which has become more of a quarterly or monthly event, we have to have a subcontractor do that. The cost is around $400 and change for each one of those that we do, and the bus is usually out of service for a couple days.
Do you know that that ash is characterized as hazardous waste?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the result of a carcinogen to the state of California's definition, so it's obviously hazardous waste, and it has to be treated as such.
How much in your budget per year, how much do you have to pay for keeping the buses maintained with those retrofits?
It is so difficult to pin a number on that because there are so many ancillary problems that come up as a result of this that it's really hard to tag it all together. But in round numbers, we're probably spending somewhere around $1,500 a month for bare bones minimum type maintenance. So far, just on one particular bus, I ran some reports this morning just to kind of get some numbers. On one particular bus, just from September 2012 to April 2013, the cost was $4,200 just for maintenance of the filter.
So how much of your budget, what kind of budget increases do you anticipate each year to keep your buses running?
Our annual budget decreases are generally fairly consistent. We don't see an annual increase in our budget. Back in 2008, when this regulation came into play in my industry, my district's budget was about $50 million. My budget was about $1.2 million at that particular point. It was estimated then that we would need a minimum 35% increase in my department's annual budget in order to attempt to meet the regulations from CARB. The very next year, we took a $200,000, or excuse me, a $2 million hit from the state in funding per pupil, so we're down to $48 million. My department suffered a $50,000 budget decrease. Consequently, the year after, I laid off 2 employees. That's a direct result of this regulation.
And the increase in budget to meet the regulation, if that money weren't being paid for that purpose, that would be classroom money, or it could be.
It would be classroom money. Unfortunately, the money that I utilize to transport students, which hopefully goes to a good endeavor by bringing them to school, does come directly out of the classroom. So any increases we see with the ARB regulations that causes higher maintenance costs, that's money that we siphon off from the children.
How do you clean, in what way? What's your process for cleaning the filters?
The standard process is what they call regeneration. Like I said, we run on a hybrid unit, which means it can either be active or passive. Passive would mean that the temperature of the exhaust when the vehicle is driven down the road is sufficient to ignite the trapped particulates in the filter and burn them off into smaller particulates so that will escape through the exhaust pipe. However, most school buses don't run in that kind of service, so we generally work with the active type, where you plug them in for all practical purposes, for ease of explaining, it's like a heating element in your oven. So we back them up to a big machine, we plug it in, it's got a timer on it, it has a small air pump on it that puts low volume, low pressure air through the filter, and between the heating and the low air pressure air, it blows the contaminants out of the tailpipe, which coincidentally points right to a school.
And so, and I know this isn't funny, but
it is.
And so the as a result of your complying with CARB, what you do is centralize the pollutants that go into the air.
Yeah, I think I told you previously when we spoke that, I think that we all understand that vehicles emit some type of emission that probably would be better if we didn't breathe, but at least in the past, my buses spread that emission out over the 1,800 square miles that we drive in on a daily basis, and even in other counties when we go on field trips, so we even take it further away for you. But now the vast majority of the emissions that we emit, because we collect them all in those filters and then we back them up to the fence by the school and we plug them in and we shoot the emissions in a concentrated form onto the school grounds, which is, in my industry, what they've been professing to try to get away from, is to keep the carcinogens away from the children.
What would you say to the board is the degree of impact on your job for the school district and on the school district itself of complying now and in the future, as far as you can see, with the CARB regulations?
You know, it makes what we do so much more difficult than it used to be. I'm in a business that should be simple. You shouldn't even know I exist, other than seeing a yellow bus driving up and down somebody's street and picking up kids. We should just be able to do what we do safely and economically, low and slow under the radar. Things like this, these types of emissions regulations, especially the backward technology. That's the problem, is going backwards and putting this stuff on engines and vehicles that it was never meant for. It makes our jobs so much more difficult to do, and with the higher degree of difficulty means that we're producing less of what we're being paid for, which means that we have to have more people to accomplish the same goals, which consequently increases the price even further of what we do. But that's not usually what happens. Usually what happens as the price increases, we figure out ways to eliminate service. I've worked for this district for over 30 years. When I came to work there, I had 28 drivers. I have 14 that work for the Shasta Union High School District currently. We transport significantly less children than we used to. Every single school bus, just by its nature, is going to take 30 to 50 kids per route off the road, and most of my buses do 2 routes. So each bus has the potential to take off the road almost 100 cars traveling back and forth to school. I don't know if congestion's a big deal. It's not really that big of a deal here in Reading, but it's getting worse all the time. So it makes it difficult, it makes it more expensive. Consequently, there's, one of the big pinnacles of my business is safety. We transport a lot of kids. We do it extremely safely. There's not another more safe form of ground transportation in the United States or in the world probably than what we do. On average in the United States, there's about 25 million students transported daily. There's approximately 6 deaths annually, which is 6 too many, I agree. But the other 25 million kids that are transported back and forth to school, there's 800 deaths on an annual basis. So what we do keeps kids safe, gets them back and forth to school, keeps them alive. As we limit our service, those types of instances, those deaths, those injuries, transportation back and forth to school in other ways, they increase. And it's more expensive, and probably emits more emissions when you put that many more vehicles on the road.
So other than just the increased cost, there's increased emissions, there's decreased safety, and there are losses of jobs and income to families.
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Hearing Officer, does the board have any questions?
Where on the bus is the filter located? Can the kids get out the door?
Yeah, most of the buses that we operate, the filter is at the extreme rear of the bus. For the transit-style buses that don't have a hood, the conventionals that have a hood, those are usually approximately somewhere half to 2/3 of the way back, and the main entrance and exit door is in the front. So, yeah, they do have the opportunity to get off.
This is, with them being in the back, I think several of these buses that we saw that burned, the filter was in the back and the bus driver drove for some distance without realizing that the bus was on fire. It took somebody pulling up beside her and stopping her for them to realize that bus was on fire.
That's absolutely possible. I apologize, I wasn't here earlier for the pictures, but that's absolutely possible. You're sitting 35, 40 feet away from something. If it's directly behind you in that blind spot where it's not coming out the sides of the vehicle where you can see it, it can be problematic to spot that, absolutely. Yes.
First, thank you for having bus service. Living in the rural area of Vacaville, my children always rode the school buses. But in their effort to upgrade the Vacaville School District, we now no longer have bus service for our students. We have a whole fleet with filters on them, but we do not have school bus service no matter how far you live from town.
That's an unfortunate trend that's going forward in the state.
It's very, very bad, you're right. Now, I had a question. So I pretty well know the cost of many of these filters, but because you had breakdowns often, there was a need to purchase this machine that cleans these rather than take them in. Am I correct? Did you purchase one of these, or?
We did. There's different levels of cleaning, and for all practical purposes, there's approximately 3 levels. We own equipment for the first 2 on site so that we can do that and minimize downtime.
And do you remember the cost of those devices?
The regeneration panels are slightly less than $7,000 a piece. The pulse cleaner that I own, I believe, was around $14,000, and I have no idea what the level 3 cleaner cost. I just remember that when we looked at it, it was far out of our reach.
So you might have approximately $30,000 into cleaning equipment?
I have 4 of the $7,000 regen panels, so that's about $28,000, and then the $13,000 machine, so
okay, thank you.
Close to 45.
Tom, could you, you've talked about downtime with a lot of your fleet. Could you expand on that a little more and just explain the implications of your scheduling and how that works?
One of the largest problems that we have with that is vehicle acquisition. You have to have vehicles in your department. Normally in my business, we figure about a 10% ratio is adequate to cover downtime and field trips. So if you own 10 buses, you're looking to have 1 more as what you call a spare. So you have something to put out on the road if something breaks down or do whatever. We're looking at approximately a 22 to 25% ratio for spare buses in order to keep what we have on the road and moving. That's pretty significant when you start looking at 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 of your vehicles are out there just to replace something that can't be driven. So that adds, additional significant expense to what our fleet operations are, because now we're not maintaining just 10% of the vehicles to have when something breaks down. We're maintaining another 10 to 15% additional vehicles in order to meet that. So it's significant. My supervisor and my gals in the office spend a great deal of their day doing what we call the bus shuffle to make sure that everybody has a bus that can make it through the day and get back to the yard.
Thank you.
Tom, one question. You mentioned you have 22 buses that were retrofitted, and you have 4 buses that are not compliant that can keep running until 2017. I was wondering how the reliability and the use of the 4 buses that are not compliant stacks up with the 22 retrofits.
Well, it's different technology, and it's been around for a while, and it's something that my technicians and myself really have a good handle on. But those buses run more frequently now because of the retrofits than they would have if I didn't have the retrofits. So because of the increase in downtime that we see in the other vehicles, we're pulling the other buses back into service more often. So the 4 buses that don't meet the emissions requirements and do have visible smoke coming out of the tailpipe, you will see them traveling down the road more often as a direct result of this law.
One other question. Did the school receive grant funds to buy these buses, or are they being supported in any way, or is it just coming out of the taxpayer dollar pockets to keep these buses running?
We did receive some grant money for some of our retrofits and some additional funds towards the replacement of 2 buses. However, that's all taxpayer dollar also. When ARB touted this regulation, one of the things that they told my industry, and they're very good at this divide and conquer thing. I could go on for hours about how this works. I've testified before their panel 3 different times. I've been involved in this very passionately since 2008. And one of the things that they do on a regular and frequent basis is they will minimize the impact. They will maximize the amount of help and well-being that's out there. And I was told at every state meeting, don't worry, there's grant funding. You can work on the lower school bus emission program. You can work on the small school district bus replacement grant. You can get CMAQ funding. You can go to your regional transportation planning authority. You can apply for money there. That kind of stuff doesn't exist really. The amount of money that's there is minimum. I'll be honest with you, it was helpful, and it was enough to keep me in business without losing too many more people and too much more equipment, but there's no additional funds for ongoing costs. None of that is out there, so my district continues to bleed the local taxpayers dry to help offset that cost. Just as an example, if I might, just one real quick example. Most school districts in the state of California average about 10,000 miles a year. Generally low mileage operation vehicles run 1,000 miles a month, 10 months a year. My average bus runs 22,000 miles a year. And I have a bus that runs up to 40,000 miles a year, okay? So based on the information that I received from ARB and this technology is that is a perfect classic vehicle that should work off the passive system. 40,000 miles a year on a school bus in 9.5 months, that should be no problem to actively burn that off. That vehicle has the most problems of anything that I operate. Prior to putting the filter on, the bus had 373,000 miles on it. A 2006 model in 2012 had 380,000 miles, 373,000 miles. We didn't feel that we were going to be able to get much additional service out of that engine by having to put the retrofit on it. I felt confident that that engine was going to make 450,000 miles the way it was going before we had to overhaul it. But because the regulation, we spent $14,000 overhauling that engine before we put the retrofit on it. So we prematurely spent $14,000 to fix that vehicle. 6 months later, we spent $18,000 to put the particulate filter on it. There's a lot of business people in here. I'm sure that very quickly they could whip out a pencil and they could figure out that the cost of a piece to go on your exhaust pipe versus the cost of overhauling an entire engine, that probably doesn't work out. That's the same bus that I shared with you that in a 5-month period we spent $4,000 doing maintenance on. That bus has had every test run on that engine. 30 years, I've been an ASE certified master school bus and truck technician for over 20 years. They're doing tests to that engine that I didn't even know existed. They have engineers coming out from back east to do things. Every single test, that bus has passed with flying colors, and yet we still cannot get the particulate filter to stop plugging up on that vehicle. That's the problem. And when ARB's asked about what they're trying to do, They tell us we're trying to clean up the air, right? So when asked, what are the projections? Where are you at? How many tons of PM? How much nitrous oxide are you taking out of the system? How long would it take to achieve your goal? If this is your goal, to get this by 2021, how long would it take you to achieve the goal of just leaving everybody alone and let natural attrition run its course? They don't have an answer for that. With the accelerated implementation of some of these items and the poor economy, okay, people going out of business, the amount of emissions that's been introduced into the atmosphere is significantly less than ARB ever projected, and they'll tell you that. It's in there. I have a stack of papers. I got about a 5-inch file on these guys, and they'll tell you in their reports that we're achieving cleaner air at an accelerated rate. They won't tell you why, but I think it's common sense. So if we're achieving this increase in air quality at an accelerated rate, why are we pushing these regulations during this terrible economy that are putting so many people out of business? Why can't we back it off and make it work correctly? And this retrofit, this backwards technology, it doesn't work. You ask anybody that works on engines, you ask engineers that build them, it doesn't work. You can't take an engine that wasn't designed for that kind of back pressure to have those types of devices put on them and expect them to last any length of time at all. It's not possible. It's causing us an accelerated maintenance rate. We're having to overhaul things. We're having to change turbochargers, injectors, all kinds of items on the engine at a much more accelerated rate than we used to. It's causing problems with the engine oil. They're constantly remanufacturing how the engine oil is to try to trap as much of that, as much of the back pressure, the problems in the back pressure as they can in the oil. It's causing us, we're seeing a significant decrease in fuel mileage. We're seeing a significant increase in how we have to change our engine oil. We used to do 15,000 mile oil changes. We're down to 12 on some others are like 7,000 or 8,000 miles because the oil becomes so contaminated so fast that you have to change it out. There's costs associated with that, and they're hard to document that that's the reason why. I could probably hire 2 or 3 full-time people to just track numbers on this. It's a travesty of justice, and anything that you can do to help offset that would be greatly appreciated, I'm sure, by everybody in the room and thousands of others. It's not right. The horse is already out of the barn, but anything that you can do to prevent this kind of activity in the future, I think, would be very helpful.
I just have an observation, and then if you want to comment on it, it'll be fine. But I do have about a 20-year background in automotive, and in the 70s I used to teach the smog control. Yes, is it okay? You want me to start over? I just have an observation, and you can comment on it if you'd like to at any time. I have a 20-year background in automotive. And when I'm hearing about these particulates, I mean, to me, when I taught smog control, the soot that came out of the diesel stack was inert, and it went down to the ground. We have another gentleman in the audience that witnessed that with his truck. Now what we're doing is we're taking like a vacuum cleaner that you would vacuum your rugs with, and we're taking the dirt out of the rug, putting it into the bag. Eventually the bag gets full of dirt. Then we take the bag and throw it away. So what the particulate filter is doing is obvious to me. It's not doing anything because it's trapping the particulates. It can't burn them no matter what you do because they're inert. You can't take an oak fireplace that burned all night, got ashes in the fireplace, and go light them back on fire again. So there's not a fumable fuel in those, not enough fuel to ignite to really burn. And I know people that work on these, and I know the people that do the baking and everything. Somebody said they vacuum clean them out. No, they blow the dust out. He says his shop covers the place. He can't hardly breathe in it. So what that filter is actually doing, and after listening to your comments, it's collecting the soot. then it has to be dispersed somewhere else. And so the benefit of any pollution control is not there. It's just that we postponed it for a while till we have to take it back out of the filter again and then throw it back in wherever we want to do it.
Yeah, it's smoke and mirrors. You're just making the ashes smaller. PM10 is the official designation of their carcinogen, and 10, I believe, refers to a micron rating, so it's the size of the particle. So by burning it smaller and getting it to disperse, they kind of wash their hands of it. But you're exactly right. All they're doing is trapping it and putting the carcinogens someplace else in a more concentrated form. Ash is ash. 10 microns or 4 microns.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your coming, appreciate your testimony.